And Matthew, great to see you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right, so I'm just going to start off by asking you, did this jury get it right?
That's a hard question. Juries, they have to, take into account many different, factors, many different segments. And here they had a very difficult decision to make. I don't think this one was easy. You could even see it in how long they deliberated. So whether or not they got it right, who am I to say on that? But there's a lot to be said about the verdict.
All right, I want to read something that Ben Crump, who represents the family of Jacob Blake. As we know, the genesis of this whole thing were protests because of the shooting of Jacob Blake, and then, of course, what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse during those protests. And he basically said, if you needed another example of two justice systems at work in America, look no further than the delayed arrest, the spectacle of a trial, and lack of a conviction of Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse, a self-declared white nationalist, crossed state lines with an unlawfully possessed AR-15 to be an instigator and a provocateur in the anti-racism protests in Kenosha. By the end of the night, he had killed 2 people and left others injured in his wake. And instead of being arrested on the spot by law enforcement, he walked away scot-free. All right, I'm going to stop there. There was a lot more he went on to say. I want to get your reaction to some of the things that he said. I have a couple of thoughts, but I want to start with you, Matthew.
I would say that's harsh. That's a harsh analysis. You got to take a lot of things in perspective, okay? The evidence, what kind of charge was brought? Honestly, if the prosecution brought a reckless charge only, you may have a much different kind of outcome. But ultimately, and what the evidence really presented. To be fair, I think that this court went through a lot of the necessary procedures to ensure a fair trial. What kind of outcome was to come out, I think that they did their part in attempting to achieve that.
All right, quickly, I just want to say, I think that there's a little bit of misinformation based on the evidence that we saw at trial, talking about Kyle as a self-described white nationalist. There really was no evidence of that. Talking about him crossing state lines with an AR-15 illegally. He did not cross state lines with that gun. That gun was in Wisconsin. He was going to the gun, and it was not possessed illegally. As we saw, the law is clear, or at least the judge found it to be clear that he was allowed to possess that gun as long as it was a certain length. It wasn't sawed off in any way, which then meant it could be more concealed. So, we keep putting out a lot of misinformation. So I have an issue with that part of it. Certainly, I don't have an issue with the two systems. But what I want to get from you is this idea that perhaps, and I think you sort of touched on it, was this a result of issues with the way the prosecutors tried this case, or was this just a tough case to win to begin with?
Yeah, I think that's a much bigger question. Absolutely, Michael. And to tell you the very truth, I think there was a couple of missteps from the prosecution, to be very frank with you. And it stems from even bringing the charge in the way that they did. They should have never gone after an intentional homicide charge. If they went straight for a reckless, they could have framed this entire trial as a reckless indifference. And that's much more difficult to try and escape self-defense to it. So, there were things along the way, like the way that he was cross-examined. I thought that the prosecution could have done a different job there dealing with the evidence. So really, a lot of procedural items went into this that I think are really worth noting.
Fair enough, and duly noted as well. And I think there were a number of issues